Alrighty, everybody. It is currently Saturday, March 28th, 2026, and I am coming at you live from the Eurasian steppe, a land of 5'4" Asian Muslims. It's an odd place. It's an odd place with a lot of history, a lot of rape, a lot of murder, a lot of conquest, a lot of intermingling of culture, usually through the rape, murder, and conquest. But it's an interesting place, and it's going to be our geographic location for this episode about the Kipchaks. Now, you might have heard of the Kipchaks before. Last episode, or the current events episode this week, I talked a little bit about Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. If you've played that game, then you know about the Cumans. They're kind of like this. I never played the first game, so I don't know if they're in the first game, but in the second game, they're like the bad guys who burn down the main character's village and all that stuff. Kipchaks and Cumans in modern times, kind of, you can use those terms interchangeably for the most part, but it's not like Cuman means Kipchak and Kipchak means Cumans. It's just that at one point the two different, I guess not tribes, I guess they're kind of whatever you want to call them, the two different ethnicities, cultures, um, intermingled to the point where it's really hard to separate them. So I'll be saying Kipchaks for the most part in this episode, but if you're hearing people talk about medieval warfare and stuff like that, because these boys get up to some shit you would not believe. You've probably never, if you've never played Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, then you've probably never heard of the Cumans, and I doubt anyone else has even heard of the Kipchaks. These guys get up to some shit you would not believe. They're almost like the Forrest Gump of of ethnicities. I mean, the shit they get up to is insane. And I've heard of some of this before, but I didn't know it was the Kipchaks, or one of the things specifically, but I didn't know it was the fucking Kipchaks who did it. Um when I was doing the research for this episode, um I was reading the Wikipedia page, and I usually use Wikipedia as like the outline for how I do the notes. Sometimes it gets a little iffy because I like to go in chronological order, and um Wikipedia doesn't really do that. And so I'll go and I'll look at different sources and stuff like that. You would be surprised how much Russian I had to try to read translated by Google. And even in like the Wikipedia article, like clearly the people who wrote these things are like very well educated and stuff like that, but their English is not the best. Like I said, even in the Wikipedia article, like the main thing, there's some pretty pretty heavy grammar mistakes that kind of made it difficult to figure out what was going on, when and where, and exactly what the boys were getting up to. Um, so I don't even know if anyone outside of Russia even knows what the Kipchaks are. I mean, they have to. Like I said, these boys are the Gump of Eurasian Turkish ethnicity. And I don't know if it's Turkish or Turkic. I've heard it pronounced both ways. I'm probably going to say Turkic because it sounds a little bit cooler, but it might be Turkish for all I know. And this is different from Turkish. Eventually, Turkish people do end up becoming the Turkish, but there's going to be a lot of bullshit in the way that we might talk about, we might not talk about. But these guys are, yeah, they're like Asian dudes hanging out like Kazakhstan type region. If I had to guess, that's where they originate from. And when we're talking about the Kipchaks here, there's gonna be there's there was a surprising amount of stuff that just wasn't recorded that was like super fucking important. Right? Like I guess these dudes, obviously, like way back in the day, they didn't have written language. You know, they were just like riding around on horses and shit. They didn't have to worry about writing shit down. But eventually, I guess they do get written language, or other people write about them, and they leave some pretty major parts out of the story. And when I was doing the notes, I did leave out a pretty major part of it. But I mean, look. It's the fucking Eurasian steppe in like the 10th century. It's just rape and murder and conquest. That's all it is. Dudes on horses, shooting arrows, raping and pillaging. That's that's really all I left out. In this episode is we're not going to be talking as much about the warfare. Like in the last episode, we kind of got into some of the nitty gritty about how the medieval Romanian kingdoms resisted Ottoman oppression and resisted a little bit of Hungarian oppression. But for these guys, obviously, when you're talking about the story of really any group of people, there's going to be a fair amount of war involved. People love war. Humans love war. Um, just like as a whole. Like I know everyone says the rich man starts the war and then the common people suffer. That that is true, but I do feel like a lot of the people who are in the war, like if you're not in the war and you're just getting taxed and it's being fought in some like far off distant land, then historically, yeah, people don't like that. But dudes really love murdering other dudes. You know, especially when they have like a real like religious reason to do it, and not even necessarily associated with like what you think of as religion, but like maybe like a religious belief about your kingdom or your tribe or your ethnicity being the dominant force in the region. When dudes have that spirit in them, that spirit of religiosity, that spirit of conviction, you know, they they really do enjoy murder. It seems, and a lot of it is murder. A lot of it is just regular, good old fashioned war killing, um, which some people say is murder. I don't know. It it's not the same. It is not the same. But obviously, the boys, when they come across a town, they do get up to some murder. It's just it's gonna happen, and it's pretty fucking egregious. You know, it's pretty fucking egregious, especially if because these Kipchak guys that we're talking about today, they're Turkic and they're kind of from the same area as the Mongolians. And well, everyone does what the Mongolians got up to. Like Genghis Khan, what is it? Like 14% of people in Asia or some shit have some sort of direct genetic linkage to Genghis Khan. Look, I'm sure a lot of ladies did consent and wanted to have sex with Genghis Khan. I'm also almost 100% sure a lot of those ladies did not were not exactly the most excited, the most enthusiastic in their procreation with Genghis Khan. And we're not going to be talking about him too much today. The Mongolians do get into this. Obviously, if we're talking about Eurasia in the Middle Ages, whatever you want to call it, I guess medieval is a little bit more of a European term. Um, but like the Middle Ages, obviously, if we're talking about Eurasia in the Middle Ages, Mongolians are they're gonna pull up, right? They basically conquered the entire fucking continent during that time. Yeah, they conquered basically all of Asia. Never got across the Himalayas. I think they never got into India. Um, but like the Middle East, obviously all of Siberia at that point had like 12 people, and they were all eating reindeer milk and shit. So that was probably pretty easy. But they got some difficult ones under their belt, and they did it the exact same time every time they did it. Every time they conquered a people, it was or like an army. Every time they defeated an army, they did it basically the exact same way. Um, I get a lot of stuff about history on my social media, like on my TikTok and on my Instagram and stuff like that, and it's a meme. Like it's super well known how the Mongolians did it, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on in this episode because, like I said, it's fucking. They took over the entire continent at this point. Um, and I don't know too much about Mongolian history, so I'm gonna try my best to explain some of this stuff, but I'm not the most knowledgeable when it comes to that topic. I don't have the background knowledge to truly be able to like extrapolate on those topics and stuff like that. But anyway, let's get into it. Let's talk about the Kipchaks. We're gonna start off with Kipchaks. Eventually, the Cumans come into play, and when we get to that, we'll talk about it. So the Kipchaks or Cumans were a Turkic tribe, and eventually a confederation that inhabited the Kipchak steppe in Eurasia. And at their peak, the Kipchaks went all the way from like modern Ukraine in the west, like all the way across Ukraine in the west, to like Siberia. I I couldn't find a map with like modern borders over it. All the maps I could find were like ancient, like where the different tribes lived and stuff like that. But I would say to like probably like Kazakhstan in the east and a lot of that like steppe region up there, like north, or I guess it would be like southern Russia. Yeah, but more so east, or I guess Russia goes pretty far fucking east, so it's more like the middle, central southern Russia. There we go. It's called the Kipchak steppe, and if you don't know what a steppe is basically like a cold grassland. Not a lot of trees, open. The terrain usually isn't too extreme, but the weather can get pretty extreme, especially in the wintertime. You know what I mean? There's no mountains to block the wind or the incoming snow and stuff like that. So the weather's pretty extreme, but it's flat a flat place, and that's why they loved riding horses so much. You know what I mean? In the steppe, uh, it's why the Comanches loved riding the horses so much because they lived in. I guess it's not a steppe. I guess it's like the tall grass, prairies or whatever. But it's flat. It's even. It's wide open. Great for horses. And so the Kipchaks, they claim that their name means hollow tree, which refers to the original human ancestress. Never heard that word before, but ancestress, uh, who gave birth to her son in a hollow tree. I don't even know if this story exists anywhere online. So I don't really know the exact details of the story. I don't know if she crawled into the tree. I don't know what I don't know if it was like what's that called? Miraculous conception or whatever, where she just got pregnant. I don't know if she banged the tree. Um I don't even know if maybe the tree is like it's a hollow tree and then the sun crawled out of it and like the tree is the ancestress. I don't really know. But the Kipchaks back in the day when they were when they were fucking shit up, they were like hollow tree. That's what our name means hollow tree. Uh, and I mean, that's all right. I don't know. I don't. Most other ethnicities, like especially like Indian tribes in North America, their name, like the Lenape, for example, or the Delaware, Lenape just means people, and that's what most other like tribes and stuff used. So, I mean, Hollow Tree, at least it's original, right? Like I said, every other tribe name, not every other, but a lot of other tribe names just mean people. But they got Hollow Tree on their side. But Hollow Tree does also kind of just mean people. Or I guess it's like the origin of people is what Hollow Tree would be in this example. So that's what they say their name means. This other guy, Gyula Nemeth, who was a 20th century Hungarian Turkologist. Which Turkologist, it's a funny job title. I don't know. Being like your whole thing is studying Turkic peoples. But that's what he did. He was also like a linguist, I think. And he says that their name comes from some sort of like Siberian dialect, and he says it means angry or quick tempered, which I don't know. I don't know how much I believe him on this. Apparently, like his sources for this is like one language that's spoken in like a super rural, isolated part of Siberia, which I guess to be fair, that's like all of Siberia, right? All of Siberia is like rural and isolated. It's a fucking frozen wasteland. Um, but his sources for this are pretty limited, right? It's just like this one specific dialect that the Kipchaks probably encountered at some point, but they also called themselves that. So I don't really know what the evidence is behind this, but I'll go with Hollow Tree. I'll believe the Kipchaks on this one, um, and I'll agree, and I'll say Hollow Tree, and also like the Eurasian steppe at this point in history was full of people who were angry and quick tempered. Right? That's like everyone there was like that. The Mongols, the Turkic peoples, eventually the Russians, the Slavs get up under there, and obviously they're pretty angry and quick tempered. So yeah, that's kind of part of the reason I don't believe it is because I don't think the Kipchaks are specifically angry or quick tempered compared to some of the other groups that existed at this time. But it could be that, like, in super ancient times, they were angry or quick tempered. I don't know. And so, all right, this this is where it gets a little bit complicated for me. Like I said, don't know that much about the Mongolians or the Turks or anything like that. So, and there's a lot of names that are pretty similar. But anyway, so they were originally part of the first Turkic Khaganate, but they eventually joined the Kipchak Kimek Confederation after the fall of the Khaganate. And so Khaganate is basically just this step word for kingdom. They were part of this kingdom. There was like, I guess, a single Khan who ruled it, but Khan, it has a bunch of different definitions, right? Like we'll hear people referred to as Khan who are like chiefs. Some are military leaders, and some are um, like emperors and stuff like that. So Khan is a title. So if you heard of like Kublai Khan or whatever, I don't know, maybe they did adopt that as their last name, but originally it's just a title that means like leader or chief, specifically like a military type leader or a militaristic type of guy. So they were part of this Turkic Khaganate, and this is like the 8th century. I think it's like the 700s, I think into the 800s a little bit. Ends up falling apart. Don't know how that happened. I don't know if the Mongols were were getting active at that point in history. I think that's a little bit pre-Mongol, a little bit, but look, I'm sure they were getting a little bit excited at that point. But anyway, they're part of this Turkey Khaganate. It falls, and they join this Kipchak Kimek Confederation. And Kimek is just it's another tribe that was around where the Kipchaks lived at. And so during this time, the Kipchaks dominated the Confederation. It's called the Kipchak Kimek Confederation, and you'll even hear it referred to sometimes as just the Kimek Confederation, but the Kipchaks really ran shit within the Confederation, and they end up joining another. I guess it's kind of a confederation of different tribes and people and stuff like that. But they dominate that too. They're pretty fucking dominant. You know what I mean? When they like join forces with another group, somehow they always scheme and are so good at war that they end up dominating within that political landscape of the Confederation. But they dominated this confederation and they began expanding their territory both eastward and westward. This isn't when they reach their height. When they reach their height after the Cumans, they link up with the Cumans, and that's when they really reach their full potential, their full power. It's when they get the most land they've ever had before. But they do get a decent amount, but it's not to the point where they're in, you know what I mean, like Western Ukraine all the way to Kazakhstan and stuff like that. They're not at that stage. They're just kind of hanging around like north of the Caucasus, I'd say. You know the Caucasus Mountains, they're in between the Black Sea and um the Caspian Sea. They're they're kind of around that area up in the north or up north of those mountains. They're not mountain people. They're not the biggest fan of the mountains. They love the steppe. They love that big, wide open landscape. big sky, all that good shit. And so both the eastward and westward conquerors absorbed tribes both culturally and ethnically before the Confederacy's dissolution in 1035. I don't remember, didn't say how this Confederacy. Oh no, I think we will talk about how the Confederacy came to dissolve. But I think it was like some sort of weird power struggle because the Confederacy is it's just a bunch of tribes that like link up with each other basically. And in this case, the Kipchaks and the Kimiks were the two dominant tribes in the Confederacy. But most of these confederacies do end up dissolving due to like power struggles of like this tribe wants to be in power, this tribe, other tribe wants to be in power. And sometimes it's like one tribe gets super powerful and the other tribe gets scared and they're like, and they fuck it. They like freak out and shit. And that causes the Confederacy to dissolve. But so they're absorbing these, absorbing, quote unquote, raping and pillaging, killing all the men and taking all the women. Um, they absorb them, and they absorb them a little bit culturally as well. But they're all like Turkish people. Turkic. I'm saying Turkic. I'm not gonna try to figure out how to pronounce it properly this episode. These are all like Turkic tribes that they're conquering. Some of them are a little bit more Siberian and stuff like that, especially the eastward conquerors. And this is the first little, I guess, rise to power that the Kipchaks had. Because before they were in the Khaganate, the first Turkic Khaganate, and they were kind of getting fucked up, or not fucked up, but they weren't dominant like they were in this Confederacy. And so this is the first little flash of brilliance or of dominance that we get from the Kipchaks. And so the collapse came, yeah, so we're going to talk about the collapse here. So the collapse came as rulers within the Confederation became more powerful and began joining other groups. It was also during this time that waves of Kipchaks began migrating towards the Islamic world, and they went even as far as Egypt. And yeah, so dissolves, there's probably in that dissolution, I don't imagine it was the most calm, peaceful thing in the world. And so a lot of Kipchaks. I think a lot of them ended up in Iran, because Iran does end up coming up in the story, going as far as Egypt. Some also ended up in like Turkey, Anatolia, that sort of region. I guess it wasn't Turkey at this point, because spoiler alert, it's named Turkey after the Turkic people, if that makes sense. And that's what the Ottomans were. The Ottomans were they were basically like Arabized Turkic people, is how I would describe it. And so a lot of them end up there. It's just kind of across the Islamic world, and I guess Anatolia at this point was not part of the Islamic world. It was part of Christendom. The Byzantines, the Eastern Roman Empire, was dominating the peninsula. Is it a peninsula? I don't know what it is. Um, Asia Minor is also another name for it. So that yeah, that's what's going on here. There's a power struggle, basically a power struggle within the Confederacy. Is Confederacy the right word there, or would it be Confederation? I don't know. I'm using them interchangeably. To me, Confederation and Confederacy are like Kipchak and Cuman. I'm using them interchangeably, and I don't really know what either of them mean. All right. And so a remnant of the Confederacy remained, and were either conquered or gradually assimilated within the Cuman tribes. Okay. And this is kind of the really important part that I completely skipped over. But when they get conquered or gradually assimilated, we don't really know. Um, I imagine there was probably a fair mixture of both because the Kipchak, like Cuman, or the Kipchak, sorry, Kipchak culture, and ethnicity and all that stuff is still preserved. So I imagine it wasn't like the most violent, rapey, like complete dominance. But I don't imagine that rape and pillaging and all that stuff was completely omitted from the Cuman, um, kind of, I guess, absorption, you could say, of the Kipchaks. But the Kipchaks were, once again, like I said, whenever they join another group of people, they always end up dominating until they don't. They eventually don't. Um, they stop dominating. But anyway, they join up with the Cumans. Either the Cumans made them, or they kind of did it peacefully. They saw the writing on the wall, and they were like, "Fuck, we can't fight these guys. We got to join up with them." So anyway, join up with the Cumans, and this is when they reach their full power, their full height. Stretching all the way from basically Eastern Europe to Central Asia. That's when they get to this point. In this kingdom, empire, whatever you want to call it, is called Cumania. I don't know how you pronounce it. Um, but yeah, this is the height of Kipchak control, I guess you could say. Um, but it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard. The Kipchaks, in and of themselves, are not the most dominant, but when they link up with another group like this, somehow they're able to dominate the relationship, and then yeah, they dominate the relationship, and then they're just super successful in conquering and stuff like that, and taking all these other tribes and taking their lands and stuff like that. So yeah, it's just kind of like a weird thing that they have going on, that they're just, it's this one thing that they're super fucking good at, is joining up with another group, dominating the relationship, and then kind of using the other group to gain power and land and all that stuff. They're really, really fucking good at it, as we'll come to find out. And so, in the 13th century, anyone who knows anything about Eurasia in the 1200s, the Mongolians are coming. They're coming over that hill with their fucking barbecue and their horses and their camels and whatever the fuck else they have. So, the 13th century, Mongols pull up to this kind of. The Mongols are just quickly advancing westward across Asia into like modern day Russia, the Middle East, all that stuff. So they're pushing, I mean, quick as fuck. And they're coming from multiple directions. They're conquering several different empires, not even like shitty little tribes, full on empires. And they're doing it, I mean, it's a gangbang, dude. Right? This one single um empire or horde or whatever you want to call it, that is the Mongols, is conquering multiple different empires at once. And so they end up finding the Kipchaks, um, as they go on their westward expanse, and they convince the Kipchaks, the Mongols convince the Kipchaks to abandon their, or desert their Alan, Alan, Alan. And I also couldn't find, I saw it spelled with an S a lot, and that was the only way I could find it spelled, but it was always referred to as the Allens, or the Alan, the Allens, or the Alans. And so I'm guessing Alan is just like the name of the tribe, or the ethnic group, or whatever you want to call it. But anyway, the Kipchaks are allies with these Alans, but the Alans are Iranic, which basically means Iranian. I don't know if that's different from Persian somehow, but they're Iranic. And so the Mongols are like, dude, we both have small squinty eyes, we both ride horses, we both have weird pointy helmets and stuff like that. Fuck those Iranic dudes that you're hanging out with. I guess they probably also told the Kipchaks that they wouldn't conquer them. Um, but once again, these are the fucking Mongolians. They're going to conquer. Mongolians are going to conquer no matter what. It's in their blood, it's in their ethos, it's in their spirit, especially during the 1200s and the 1300s and the 1400s, and for a pretty long time. They love riding on horses and conquering people. It's just what they're a big fan of. And so anyway, they tell the Kipchaks, "Yo, stop hanging out with the Alans. they're not even the same as you. We're closer to you. You know, at this point, the Mongolians had started absorbing and assimilating various Turkic peoples into their ranks, and so yeah, they're able to convince the Kipchaks to abandon the Alans based on sort of, I guess, an ethnic allegiance. And so anyway, after the Mongols conquered the Alans, they did the same to the Kipchaks, who fled under a guy named Khan Khotin uh, to the Principality of Kiev, whose nobles had marriage relations to the Kipchaks. Yeah, and this is big part of diplomacy in the Middle Ages was marrying off your kids. Like I think it was this guy Khan Khotin, his son-in-law was the king or the prince or the chief, maybe. I don't know if it was a chief. Anyway, of this Kiev principality, and we think of Kiev now as a city. It's named after it's named after a way bigger like kingdom that was going on back in the day. There was also this thing called the Kievan Rus, which existed at the time, and that was basically like proto Russia. It was all like these different kingdoms that were hanging out with each other, that were all friends and stuff like that. Uh, I don't know if the Kievan Rus is the same as the Principality of Kiev. I think it's the same thing. I could be wrong though. But anyway, Khan Khotin, aka Chief Khotin, he takes 40,000 families with him. 40, not 40,000 people, 40,000 families. So this is a fucking lot of people, you know. This is, you got to remember, this is the Middle Ages. Uh, each one of these families probably has 12 people in it, right? So he has a lot of fucking people with him. And he pulls up to the Kievan Principality, where his steps, or not his stepson, his son-in-law is basically the big dog on the block. And so he's like, dude, you got to take us in. The fucking Mongols are coming. And obviously, the Kievans are, they're also probably pretty fucking scared of the Mongols. And they see all these people, you know what I mean? The Kipchaks have been pretty dominant in the region over the time, uh, you know what I mean, in the past few years. And so they accept Khan Khotin and all these refugees, all these Kipchak refugees into their principality. And so the Ruthenians, which is just the Kievians, formed an alliance and confronted the Mongols at the Kolka River where the Mongols fled. I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to spoil anything later on in the story, but it's the same fucking story every single time with the goddamn Mongols. They pull it off every single time. And I was actually thinking about how they were able to pull it off every single time. And I'll talk about that a little bit later on. But the Ruthenians see the Mongols, or they spied the Mongols, eventually confronted them at this river, and the Mongols were like, fuck this. We're out of here. We're not gonna try to conquer you guys. We already got all the Kipchak steppe. You know what I mean? Like I said, the Kipchak steppe was pretty large at this time. And so they're just like, yeah, fuck this. We're not fighting you guys. And they dip out of there. And the Ruthenians are like, hell yeah, dude. We get the fucking Mongols to retreat. The Mongols, the dudes who are conquering the continent. They just fucking retreated from us. And we didn't land a single blow or fire a single arrow. Let's go destroy them. Let's go destroy the fucking Mongolians. Once again, if you're a history buff, um, I hate that term. I hate the term history buff. But anyway, if you're a big history guy and you know anything about the Mongols, you know how this turns out. And so the alliance closely pursued the Mongols before arriving in a hilly area where the Mongols hid before emerging and slaughtering the entire Ruthenian camp. And these Ruthenians are, they're Slavs, I think. They're like white people. The Kipchaks, obviously, like I said, they're Turkic, small little Asian dudes, a lot more like the Mongols in terms of at least the aesthetics of their ethnicity, and really a lot of their culture. They're pretty similar. And so, yeah, if you don't know anything about the Mongols, or really a lot of the people who fought like the Mongols, this is the strategy every single time. It's just what they do, and they're so it's crazy for like an invading army to be able to do this and do it so well every single time. Basically, what they do is they pull up, they maybe get in like a little bit of a skirmish, and then they just retreat. And we talked about the Russian warfare episode. Um, we talked about the Russian strategy with scorched earth and all that stuff. Uh, the Romanians, once again, they're big fans of the retreat, and so the the Mongols would retreat super fast, right? These Mongols, they're expert horse riders. They're also light cavalry, so they're not armored up like that. Like they got like a helmet and like a leather, like hardened leather armor on, but they're not big, heavy cavalry. They're not like knights or whatever. Their horses don't have any armor. And so they just retreat as fast as fucking possible. And obviously, they retreat as fast as possible. The the enemy that they're facing is going to chase them as fast as possible. And supply lines take a lot longer to move than it does for an army to move. You know what I mean? Especially a mounted army. And so the the pursuing army doesn't have any access to supplies or anything like that. And obviously the Mongols are leading them on a wild goose chase, or not a wild goose chase. They do end up finding the goose, but the goose kills and slaughters them all like cattle. Um and so the Mongols pick a place that they think is like a good place that they can, perform an ambush out of, ambush these guys, kill them all, and then go and conquer the land they just fled from. It's what they do every single time. And the meme about the Mongols is like, surely we'll kill the fleeing horse archers this time. Surely it's a real retreat this time. That's kind of what the meme is. And I was thinking about how they're able to do it so well. And I was just like, it's because they're faster than everyone else. Like the Mongols would ride a horse to death. You know what I mean? This is the Eurasian steppe. There's plenty of fucking horses around. You know what I mean? You can bring a ton of horses with you, and it's not that big of a deal. It's not like you're navigating through a mountain landscape or whatever. No, it's big, wide open fields. Horses love big, wide open fields. So you can just bring a fuck ton of extra horses with you. The Mongolians would like ride a horse to death, get another horse, and they're not dressed up in any heavy armor or anything like that. Uh, they're not beholden to having to like hold a castle or anything. So they just retreat. They're faster than you, so they're able to regroup. They probably also they had some really good generals. There's this one guy, Subutai. Um, and I think it might have actually been, I'm trying to remember where Subutai was hanging around. I think this might have been Subutai who did this. Anyway, Subutai was like Genghis Khan's main guy. He was his main general and all that stuff. And so anyway, they did the same strategy every time. It worked every time, and they did it on the Kipchaks. Fucking dominated. Uh, and the Mongols, you know, I don't know if they would have been able to invade Europe or not and dominate it like they did the rest of Asia. I don't know. The way they were fucking up a lot of those Middle Eastern empires, they probably would have been able to do decently well in Europe. But basically, the only reason that the Mongols didn't get super far into Europe is because Genghis Khan died, and when the Khan died in the Mongol Empire, they would like convene all the generals and all the powerful people together, and they would elect a new Khan. But I I think it was like a dynastic type situation. So maybe they were electing other people, or maybe they were just like going to Genghis Khan's funeral. I don't really fucking know. But anyway, the only reason the Mongols didn't fully invade Europe, or at least try to fully invade Europe, is because Genghis Khan died, and so all the dudes like pulled back to go reconvene with each other and try to figure shit out, basically. And so the remaining Kipchaks, like I said, the Mongols slaughtered the Ruthenians, the Kievians, whatever you want to call them, destroyed them. And so the Kipchaks were left alive. I don't know if the Kipchaks were in like a different area, or if the Mongols, felt this ethnic connection to them, and that's why they didn't slaughter them. Although they slaughtered a lot of people that they shared closer ethnic connections with. So I'm guessing the Kipchaks were just in like a different area than the Mongols were, or than the Ruthenians were. So the remaining Kipchaks were absorbed into the Mongol ranks, while the refugees fled west into Hungary, where King Bela the Fourth, B-E-L-A, Bela, I don't know how you pronounce it. King Bela the Fourth granted them refuge in exchange for their conversion to Christianity. So, yeah, Hungary. We talked a little bit about Hungary in the last episode. Hungary is super powerful. We think of modern Hungary, like I said, this shitty little fucking Eastern European turd. Basically, it's like a country that's shaped like a turd. Um, we think of it as like that, but Hungary was a lot bigger and a lot more powerful during this time. But once again, you know anything about the Mongols and in history and stuff like that, the Hungarians got pretty fucked up by the Mongols. Uh, but these guys, the Kipchaks, they're welcoming it into the kingdom uh, by this guy, King Bila. I'm just going to say Bila, King Bila the Fourth, and they convert to Christianity. I think at this point they were still pagan. They they might have been Muslim. Obviously, all the ones that went to the various Muslim kingdoms, even going as so far as Egypt, obviously they all converted to Islam. But I don't know if like the OG Kipchaks who still lived in that steppe. I don't know if they were Muslim. I imagine that they were probably pagan, though, uh, if I had to guess. The Mongolians were Buddhists, I think, which is everyone thinks of Buddhism as like this religion of peaceful monks sitting on top of mountains meditating and stuff like that. And then you got Genghis Khan. And we talked about this other guy a while ago named Roman von Ungern Sternberg, he was like Estonian Prussian low nobility who ended up fighting in World War One in the Russian Civil War. And then he was like, fuck this, I'm gonna go be a warlord in Mongolia, and he had this weird form of Buddhism that was intermixed with like Protestant Christianity, I think specifically like Lutheran doctrine and stuff like that. And he was really big into he was a fucking crazy dude. You know what I mean? No wonder the Mongols love this guy so much. But like I said, he fought in World War One, so this was like the 1900s. The dominance of the Mongolian Empire had long since faded at this point, or at that point. But anyway, the Mongols are fucking crazy. I guess I guess is the point of all this. And also the other point is I don't know what religion the Kipchaks were. They were probably still pagan. Even oh, Russia. I don't think the Kievan Rus was pagan at this point, because the person who converted the Russians into being Christians was the grandson of Olga of Kiev. So yeah, it was Volodymyr the Great who did all that. And so yeah, the Russians were Christian at this point, and obviously the Kipchaks do have like, I'm just gonna call them Russians. I'm not gonna say the Kievan Rus or anything like that. Obviously the Kipchaks do have somewhat of a close relationship, so some of them might have been Christian, some of them might have been pagan. I don't really know. But this guy King Bila, and also in converting them to Christianity, I don't think the salvation of the Kipchak souls was exactly the goal of King Bela's conversion of the Kipchaks. I think it was more so about making them loyal to Hungary and in the Catholic Church and stuff like that. If I had to take a shot in the dark, but like I said, don't really know. So the Kipchaks, this large group of Kipchaks, is chilling in Hungary, all Christian, all that good stuff. King Bela's chilling with them. Although, is he? Because in 1241, Khan Khotin, the guy who led all these families into Hungary through the Kievan Rus, he's killed. He was murdered somewhere in Hungary, and this was like a murder. This wasn't like the Mongols invaded or they got in a war or anything like that. Khan Khotin, Chieftain Khotin, was straight up murdered in Hungary. And so the Kipchaks fled and they dispersed throughout Europe while some ended up joining the Mongols. The Mongols, they did reconvene, like I said, and they kind of pulled out of Europe in that area, but they come back and they come back with a vengeance. They get pretty far into Europe, if I remember correctly. You know, like Hungarians specifically are they they have a lot of admixture, like, genetically, I think, with the Mongolians, but there were previous, like, Hunnic invasions into Hungary. That's why it's called Hungary. Um, and so yeah, I don't really know, but I do think the Mongolians got pretty deep into Europe during this time. And so, yeah, they dispersed throughout Europe, and this is kind of this contingent of the Kipchak ethnicity, the Kipchak population, the Kipchak culture. They uh, they preserve some of their culture, but they're kind of starting to lose it. They're losing it a little bit at this point as they disperse throughout Europe. And I guess I'll talk about what I want to talk about with the next little piece of notes we got here. So yeah, a lot of them do join the Mongols, and that's really important. Remember that Kipchaks, they join the Mongols after they get defeated when they're allies with the Kievan or with the Russians. Like I said, I'm just gonna call them Russians. And then a lot of them join the Mongols after Khan Khotin is murdered when they're in Hungary. So throughout Europe and Asia Minor, which is Anatolia, modern day Turkey, if you don't know, the Kipchaks served as mercenaries, and many were taken as slave warriors to Egypt. Another important thing you got to remember, Kipchaks, they're pretty good mercenaries. They're light cavalry. They're really, really fucking good light cavalry. I know what the purpose of heavy cavalry is, and I guess the physical geography, the physical landscape of Europe is a lot different than the Eurasian steppe, and so maybe that's why they don't use light cavalry as much in Europe. But light cavalry just seems like the ultimate thing. It just seems so much. It's just so dominant. But anyway, the reason I wanted to get into the Kipchaks, or the reason I chose them, was I'd heard of them before. Um, and like I said, I didn't even know that Cumans and Kipchaks were the same thing until this I did this episode. But they have these sick fucking masks that they wear. Look up Kipchak armor. They have the and I don't know, maybe I'm just a big fan of these of this type of helmet, because I'm also a big fan of the Anglo-Saxon helmets that kind of have the same thing, where on top it's kind of a normal helmet, and then they have this face plate, and the face plate looks like a face. It has like a mustache, eyes, lips, the whole nine yards. It looks like a face, and something about it is, I don't know. I fucking love the way it looks. Kipchak armor is sick as fuck. And so that's kind of the reason I chose them. But anyway, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, you run into some Cumans, aka Kipchaks, and they're serving as mercenaries within Hungary. And so a lot of Kipchaks, I guess, did stay in Hungary and served as mercenaries for Hungary. But they're serving as mercenaries kind of all over Eastern Europe, the Balkans, Anatolia, and stuff like that. And so obviously we have this contingent of the Kipchak people that went to Hungary, but a lot of them stayed in the homeland. And so as the Mongolians conquered their lands, separate groups of Kipchaks arrived in the empire of Nicaea in western Anatolia, where Emperor John III Ducas, this motherfucker's last name is Dookie. But John III Ducas, who was the emperor of this empire of Nicaea, he settled them, I think, in the east. I don't really remember where he settles them, to be fully honest with you, but they're in Anatolia, modern day Turkey. And this guy John III Ducas settles them in this one area to protect them from foreign invasions. And so the way these Kipchaks, and remember, this is a completely separate group from the one that went with Khan Khotin. They went like down through the Balkans, and they're in the Balkans. And this guy John III Ducas sees them hanging around there, and he's like, "Fuck!" Like these, he knows what's up with these Turkish Mongolian peoples. He's like, they're gonna start raping and pillaging and like dominating this area. And so before they can start doing that, he takes them and moves them to basically act as a buffer between um, foreign invasions into Nicaea, which is a pretty smart move by him. He killed two birds with one stone there. He prevents chaos from erupting in his kingdom because the Kipchaks just love raping and murdering and dominating. And he moves them, and in moving them, he kind of creates a buffer zone where foreign invaders got to go through these fucking Kipchaks first. And like I said, the Kipchaks, they fight a lot like Mongols. They do seem to be a bigger fan of heavier armor, but I imagine that they're also incredible when it comes to light cavalry, horse archery, and things like that. So he has this this people who have like this fighting spirit in them, protecting his border. Once again, I don't remember if it was Eastern or Western, but they're protecting his border. And so the Kipchaks who fled to Egypt and the ones who were enslaved as to be warriors in Egypt, they started an uprising and they dominated Egypt with the Mamluk Sultanate, which was once referred to as the state of Turks, although they were heavily Arabized. Like I said, they convert to Islam, they adopt a lot of Arab customs and cultures and stuff like that. But the Mamluks was it was this super powerful sultanate that was started by the Kipchaks, basically the Kipchak slaves in, and I had heard of the Mamluks before, and I had heard of them in the context of being like a slave uprising that started basically this Islamic empire in Egypt. But I didn't know it was the Kipchaks. Like I said, the Kipchaks are the Gumps. They just join up with these other groups and they just fucking dominate somehow. And they dominated in the Mamluk Sultanate, although they are like physically, like you can look at this guy and be like, oh, that's a Turkish guy, that's a Kipchak guy. You can look at him and see him, although they are a little bit more white looking. Um, Obviously when they start getting dominated by the Mongols and stuff like that, they do they do get a little bit more Asian looking. They get a little bit Asian with it. Hey, get a little bit white boy gets a little bit Asian with it, but they're a distinct looking people, I'll say. So yeah, they start this fucking slave uprising in in Egypt, and they start the fucking Mamluk Sultanate, which is an incredibly powerful, dominant Islamic sultanate. It's fucking crazy. Like I said, I had heard of it before. I'd fully heard of the Mamluk Sultanate and understood its origins and its dominance afterwards. And had no idea it was the Kipchaks. Had no idea it was the Boyz. Boyz are getting up to it, dude. And obviously the ones in Europe they're just being mercenaries, just regular good old fashioned mercenaries. They're not starting any, you know, incredibly powerful kingdoms or sultanates or empires or anything like that, but they are pretty feared. They do have a reputation in Europe um, as these brutal fighters, and they're very fucking good at it. So the Kipchaks who were absorbed into the Mongolian Empire, this is where I kind of wish I had a little bit more background knowledge when it comes to the Mongolians, just really in general. But I'm going to try to explain this the best I can. So the Kipchaks who were absorbed into the Mongol Empire quickly rose to power within this thing, and eventually this thing called the Golden Horde became known as the Kipchak Khanate, which uh, after the Mongol Empire fractured. Okay. We got through it. We got through my poorly written notes. So I'm going to try to explain this the best I can. It's pretty simple, but I'm sure there's some intricacies, some nuances and stuff that I'm missing. So the Mongol Empire is dominating pretty fucking hardcore across Eurasia at this point. Um, and I think Genghis Khan dies and some other people die. And so the empire fractures and we get this thing called the Golden Horde. And the Golden Horde is, I think it's founded by one of Genghis Khan's, maybe not his son, but one of his direct descendants. So they start this thing called the Golden Horde. And the Golden Horde is basically a splinter empire from the Mongols. Yeah, and this happened in 1259 is when it split up, in the Golden Horde and all that stuff was founded. So the Golden Horde is in the western part of the Mongolian Empire. And so that's where the Kipchaks are. And so they come to power within the Golden Horde and dominate, and it eventually becomes known as the Kipchak Khanate. Okay, there we go. I explained it as best as I could. It's pretty simple, but like I said, I don't really know a lot of the details of it. I know the Mongolian Empire splits up. Golden Horde is founded from that splitting up, and it wasn't like a violent splitting up. It was just too large to sustain. The Mongols didn't. They were really good militarily and even diplomatically. They were really good. They set up a lot of good diplomatic relationships. Genghis Khan himself was, as much as he was brutal, a brutal fucking general, he was also a fairly decent diplomat. Um, and yeah, Golden Horde is founded after this kind of breaking apart, not splitting up, not fighting each other, not, it's not a separatist movement or anything like that. It's just kind of too big. They expanded too quickly, basically, to sustain this huge fucking empire that they founded from like a logistics standpoint. That they can't sustain it. And so it splits up. We got the Golden Horde. Golden Horde is where the Kipchaks are hanging out. Kipchaks doing what the fucking Kipchaks do, become extremely dominant within the Golden Horde, um, militarily, probably politically and diplomatically as well. And a lot of the politics was based around war, which is probably why the Kipchaks became so powerful within the Golden Horde. And yeah, they fuck it up. Once again, the Kipchaks are doing what they do. They're great at it. They're some of the best at it ever, I'd say. And this is when this event, I guess, this splitting up of the Mongol Empire leads to the Mongols and the Turks, the Turkic peoples, kind of intermingling with each other a whole lot and creating this one Turkic Mongol ethnic cultural group. And I don't know how important that is to world history, but that's when it happens. So there you go. A little fun fact for you. And so the Horde was eventually conquered in the 14th century by a Mongol Turkic empire called the Timurid Empire, and this was basically the end of Kipchak power. I think the Mamluk Sultanate lasted until the 1500s, maybe, but the Kipchaks, um, they they were politically dominant, and I'm sure uh other ethnicities who were maybe a larger majority within the Mamluk Sultanate started to rise to power. But this really, when the Timurid Empire conquers the Golden Horde, aka the Kipchak Khanate, it's basically the end of the Kipchaks being super, super powerful. And the Timurid Empire, those boys are hanging around Uzbekistan, I think. And like I said, they're Turkic Mongolian people, um, and they conquer. And like I said, the Turkic Mongolian intermingling was something that was going on at this time. I don't know why I repeated it. It's not really too important to our story. So the final remnants of the Kipchaks are in Turkey, modern day Turkey, Anatolia. Remember, a lot of them fled there, in multiple different waves. Made big important one was when, what was it? What was that guy's name? Emperor Dookie, Emperor shit from an ass, um, puts them on his border so that they can kind of be a buffer between invading armies, and they're able to hold out through all of that. They preserve their identity in the face of Ottomanization. When the Ottomans came in and started dominating, the Kipchaks were like, "Fuck that, we're doing our own Kipchak thing." So that's kind of where the last remnants of the Kipchak ethnicity and stuff, because these guys, they're not a super large ethnic group, and they spread out over this super wide area. And so over time, obviously, um, their ethnicity is going to kind of get diluted. There's not going to be any purebloods. But there are some purebloods, and they're in Turkey, where they manage to preserve their identity, their ethnicity, their culture. I don't know how much they preserve their culture, but at least their ethnicity in the face of the Ottomans, who, once again, Ottomans are Turkic people, Turkic and Mongolian at this point, pretty similar, kind of the same thing in a lot of ways. Love raping and killing, big fans of it. And really, everyone was at this time. The Mongolians were just, they were just like this blaze of rape and yeah, they were just a blaze of rape that spread across Eurasia. But yeah, that's kind of the general story of the Kipchaks. Pretty cool guys, pretty interesting. Like I said, they're kind of gumpish. They're this small little ethnic group that most people have never heard of in their entire lives, but they played an integral role in things that people have heard of, incredibly powerful empires and kingdoms and sultanates and things like that. So, those are the Kipchaks. It's pretty fucking interesting. Although I didn't explain it well, episode isn't great. Uh, but that's just because I'm dumb. You know what I mean? It's not because the Kipchaks aren't interesting. It's because I'm a retard. So, I hope everyone listening to this has a good day, a good week, a good year, a good life. And I'll see you guys in the next episode.